Hot.
It's 5:05 and welcome into a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. During an emergency briefing yesterday morning, Governor Josh Stein declared a state of emergency. This comes ahead of winter weather that is expected to affect the state from the Tennessee border to the Atlantic Ocean throughout the early parts of the day out west and into the afternoon and evening hours as you move east today. Emergency Management Director Will Ray said the state's emergency response team has been activated, along with more than 180 National Guardmen to assist the emergency response team. National Guard assets are placed in Kinston, Elizabethtown, Edenton, Greensboro, Lewisburg, Rockingham, Surry County, Raleigh, and Charlotte. Stein said the biggest concerns are power outages and road safety, where snow is going to transition to ice. He said, quote, hazardous travel conditions are expected tomorrow, being today, and over the next several days. Emergency Management Director Will Ray said, we ask that all North Carolinians continue to monitor the weather and stay off of the roads. Unnecessary travel not only puts you at risk, but it also puts public safety personnel, power crews, and DOT workers at that same risk. We need folks to heed the request and stay off of the roads. Transportation Secretary Joey Hopkins said the department has more than 1,300 employees and contractors preparing the roads. You heard that with Boomer Von Cannon. The brining taking place across many roads in the state as of in the overnight hours and continuing this morning. As of yesterday, they had used over 1 million gallons of brine to pre-treat hundreds of miles of highways across the states, and there are nearly 500 trucks with plows and spreaders that are getting ready to remove that snow and ice once it begins to fall in the afternoon and evening hours. Plus, DOT has got over 130,000 tons of salt ready to treat the roads once the snow hits. They've noted that the Transportation Department is staging equipment in known trouble spots, as well as Duke Energy is also preparing for the possibility of power outages throughout the day as well. The Director Ray said, quote, Duke has shared with us that they are moving crews in from out of state to a number of different locations in North Carolina. Today we are moving crews from west to east. For those in western North Carolina, it is going to be mostly snow in the central part of the state, a snow and wintry mix, and then more ice and sleet as you get closer to the eastern half of the state. Some areas looking up near the Greenville and Greenville area could be dealing with some severe icing, which could lead to some widespread power outages. Again, that'll be taking place this afternoon into the evening hours, and that is another winter storm that we are seeing here across the state of North Carolina. Keeping an eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. With that, Governor Josh Stein, we got the word yesterday that he is set to give his State of the State address coming up here in just a couple of weeks, March the 12th at 7 p.m. The General Assembly filed a resolution yesterday officially inviting the Democrat governor to give that joint address out at the House of Representatives in Raleigh. That'll be taking place March the 12th at 7 p.m. We'll track details as we get closer to that right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. It's now 5:09, News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. So many years removed from COVID-19, COVID lockdowns, and the impacts all across our lives, we are still talking about that in regards to education. To get some more details on how that's playing out here in North Carolina, it's my pleasure to welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour this morning, Syndicated columnist John Hood. I can't believe we're still talking about COVID and lockdowns, but you've got an interesting piece up this morning over at carolinajournal.com. What are those details looking like?
Well, Nick, we're going to be talking about the effects of COVID for many, many more years to come, because one of the long-term effects that isn't so much about medical care and the illness itself is about the closure of schools. North Carolina kept its schools closed longer than many of the other states in our region, places like Florida, places that are neighboring states. And the argument was that we're trying to keep people safe, particularly children, which wasn't a very good argument since the risk to young people from COVID was very small. But the more serious argument was that it was an attempt to preserve the health of teachers and people who might catch the virus from teachers, that sort of thing. Still wasn't a very good argument, but it was a better argument. To weighing against that was the very obvious risk that if you kept schools closed for more than a few weeks, maybe a few months, that the damage to the academic achievement, to what students need to be learning, reading, mathematics, other subjects, and also social cues and learning how to interact with other people, that kind of damage would be deep and it would be lasting. Well, there's still a debate about how deep the damage is and whether it will last for the entire duration of the COVID generation school careers, but there is no debate that it had a negative effect. You can see that in recent studies, including an Urban Institute analysis of National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP scores. The NAEP is the best set of exams we have to track the performance of American school children over time. NAEP, which is a federal program, they administer this test every couple of years or so to a representative sample in every state. And so you can really see how North Carolina tracks with other states. Until 2019, the story in North Carolina had been, since the introduction of these tests, really, that North Carolina had been improving significantly. That kind of leveled off in the 2010s, but we still had it by 2019, if you average across all four of the exams, fourth and eighth grade, math and reading, and you adjust for student background, which you need to do in order to try to evaluate the effect of schools themselves, North Carolina was ranked 7th in the country in test score. We shouldn't have been settling for that because lots of states in the union don't have very good schools, but we were comparatively well off in terms of public school outcomes. In 2022, NAEP administered the first post-COVID or during COVID tests. North Carolina tumbled from 7th to 29th.
Wow.
In terms of the actual scores, there was a 10-point drop in the math scores for 8th graders in North Carolina, 7-point drop. These are not tiny drops. These are statistically significant drops. And the concern is that was the consequence of North Carolina under former Governor Roy Cooper keeping the schools closed much longer than in other places. For example, Florida and Texas still have top 10 ranked school systems like North Carolina used to have in 2019. They still have those today. They didn't have the long school closures. North Carolina did. Now, I don't want to jump to too many conclusions here because there could be other factors in play, but I do think more careful studies suggest that there is at least a modest negative effect of keeping schools closed longer. Some studies show a major negative effect of keeping schools closed longer. So I think North Carolina, again, under the former administration, the Cooper administration, made a significant error in keeping our schools closed so long. And we just have to hope that our schools, our teachers, our parents, our kids can try to recover effectively from that. Perhaps the 2024 NAEP scores will show a bit of a bounce back. I certainly hope so.
We'll continue the conversation with syndicated columnist John Hood coming up after this. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:13, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We'll get a look at roads on your Wednesday morning with the great Boomer Von Cannon.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you.
It's 5:20. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Streaming live this morning on our Carolina Journal YouTube channel. You can take the show on demand on the go by downloading our podcast. It's available wherever you get your shows. Just search for the Carolina Journal News Hour in your favorite podcast app. Tap the subscribe or follow button, and you'll get a new show delivered each and every weekday morning. It's the Carolina Journal News Hour podcast. Download and subscribe now. Continuing our discussion this morning with Syndicated columnist John Hood and his piece over at carolinajournal.com this morning. John, talking about the recovery and relief efforts is specifically dealing with these children in the K through 12 public education system on how old the student was or what grade they were in K through 12 when this happened. If you look at 7th or 8th graders that were in 7th or 8th grade or going into those grades when those lockdowns started, John, you've only got now 2 additional years with those students before you ship them off to college. If they're not at the level that their predecessors were prior to COVID-19, is it fair to say then maybe you have to start adjusting things on the collegiate level to adapt to these children that, I guess, across the board are all dealing with some sort of this learning loss? There could be a huge effect here, not just in K through 12.
Well, there could be. I mean, one possible explanation or reaction to what you said is, well, maybe most of the learning loss is concentrated among the lowest performing students who are unlikely to attend college anyway. So it's going to hurt them to not be performing as well, but it doesn't necessarily affect what colleges will have to do later, because not a high percentage of those students were likely to end up at least at a 4-year university. That's not the story though, Nick, because when I looked at advanced students who had tested advanced, we had fewer of those in 2022 than in 2019, significantly fewer. The percentage who were proficient, which is sort of in between an advanced student and a basic level student, proficiency is also down. So this learning loss effect didn't just affect kids who are at the bottom end of academics. They were already behind and COVID put them further behind. That happened. But it also affected the performance of students in the middle of the distribution and even our advanced students. Now, you're right. We've got more time to try to help our younger students recover. The 4th grade scores were also weak, but it is possible they will bounce back. We should certainly pray that all of this reverses itself. But I'm afraid what we're going to have is, you're right, some students who end up going to college whose learning losses during COVID were never fully regained, never fully offset, and they're going to struggle a bit. And we're also going to have some kids who weren't necessarily going to go to university. Maybe they were on the cusp. Now they're not going to. And we've got to figure out effective ways to improve their math and reading skills so they can perform well in the working world and really just as citizens of our country. That's one of the main reasons we educate kids. It's not just so they'll have jobs. It's so they can be citizens, so they can shoulder responsibilities as voters, as parents, as members of a community. And the learning losses are severe. That is why we should have taken a much closer look back in 2020 and 2021, when other states and much of the developed world was sending their kids back to school and North Carolina did not. Now, again, I think that was I don't want to question the motives of the people who made this decision, because I think they meant well, but they made a bad call, and we should learn from that and be much more careful in the future about just saying, well, I mean, students can just learn from home. There are lots of ways you can impart information over the internet. There are some distance learning programs that work, but slapping something together during an emergency was never going to work, and in fact, it did not.
Well, I mean, a great example of this is you and I are talking virtually this morning as we have this discussion. John, we're both adults. We don't need to learn social cues. We're able to interact with each other. You throw a 3rd grader in front of a Zoom call, that's a completely different ball game in what we're talking about.
Indeed. And also, you and I are engaged in a one-on-one conversation. And if I don't answer your questions, this is going to go very poorly. But if you're teaching a group of kids and they're all on a screen, I actually did a little bit of this. On the side, I teach dancing. And for at least a few weeks, we had to convert our classes from in-person classes to Zoom classes. You could just imagine how challenging it was to try to teach tap dancing over Zoom. But any kind of teacher dealing with even a dozen students, okay, some of them are going to zoom out. You can't really keep up with them as well. Their attention tends to wander. They're much more easily distracted. Even the best teachers doing their level best to do something valuable with distance learning, you're going to lose some attention. It's just not as effective for most students. Again, there are exceptions. There's certain kinds of things, well-designed online modules that take kids through certain videos or through certain diagrams and test them. That's not what was happening. What was happening was an attempt to lecture or lead conversations or do worksheets over Zoom. It was not well thought out. Again, I'm not questioning the intentions of the people involved. They never anticipated trying to deliver for a whole year or longer public education to grade schoolers. That just wasn't what anyone had anticipated doing. And it showed. It didn't work. And we should learn that lesson, not just about schooling, but when you have a real risk, COVID was a real risk, and you're trying to balance that against the cost of mitigating that risk, don't downplay those costs. The educational costs, separate from the economics and people's jobs and all the things that happened to businesses during COVID, but the educational losses from those lengthy school shutdowns are massive, and they simply were not even remotely justified by the scant benefits.
So, John, as we turn the page on this, focusing on some of those younger students that we have more time with in that K through 12 public education system, what can we do for those individuals that may have been going into first, second grade back when this lockdown, they're now fourth or fifth graders? Do we have time to try and help them recover and get them up to what a standard, middle or high schooler would be as they progress through the education system?
Well, I want to be careful to say I might be called an expert at how to teach tap dancing, but not necessarily how to teach arithmetic. But what I've understood, the studies that I've read, the true experts that I've consulted, the magic word that you already mentioned is time. Some of what will be needed is additional time, tutoring time, in-depth time with small groups or individual students to get them caught up. We're also going to, North Carolina at least has started to revolutionize the teaching of reading and I think soon mathematics. And those improved ways of teaching, in case of reading, getting young people familiar with phonics and basic structures of language, we're probably going to see some recovery in the 2024 NAEP scores and beyond. And I just hope that we can do it fast enough so that the lasting effects on students when they become adults is maybe moderated. I don't think it'll be entirely offset, but significantly moderated would be a good outcome at this point.
John, it's some great insight this morning. Where can folks read more and check out all of your work?
Well, my column runs in a lot of newspapers, but you can always read it first at carolinajournal.com.
John Hood joins us this morning on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 528, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Another look at the roadways on a Wednesday morning. An update with Boomer Von Cannon.
All right, Nick, thanks.
It's 5:35. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good Wednesday morning to you. Some great news to pass along to you this morning. Country music legend and North Carolina native Eric Church purchased land through his nonprofit Chief Cares late last week. The property purchased by the nonprofit is in Avery County, where Church and his wife plan to build at least 40 homes for individuals that lost everything as a result of Hurricane Helene. Just 1 month after Helene devastated western North Carolina, portions of eastern Tennessee, and other states, Eric Church performed at the Concert for the Carolinas alongside Luke Combs, James Taylor, Keith Urban, Bailey Zimmerman, Scotty McCready, and others. The event drew more than 82,000 attendees and raised nearly $25 million for hurricane victims, with those proceeds being split between Church and Combs for relief efforts. During the concert, Church announced his plan to use his share of funds to build 100 homes in 100 days. The homes in Avery County are part of that initiative. The nonprofit plans to build 40 to 50 neighborhood homes in Avery County. They plan to break ground on the neighborhood in April and hope to have people in homes by June. That's according to WCNC, who had the details on that. Church had dubbed his initiative a blueprint for the Blue Ridge. And according to their website, quote, "We are going to start by immediately building homes for 100 families in Avery County and surrounding areas and keeping these communities preserved and rebuilt. We are also helping to address long-term needs like creating jobs, rebuilding schools, and supporting local businesses. Often when disasters strike, funds flow in from great people wanting to help. But when the world turns its eye to the next devastation, a lot can get lost and fall through the cracks. We are committed to a long-term rebuilding of these communities." In October, Church and former Governor Roy Cooper visited Banner Elk following Hurricane Helene. Church said at the time, again back in October, "Anytime a disaster happens, and this is not just in North Carolina, this is nationwide, we're pretty good at the 911 part. We show up and we help them immediately. A lot of times what happens is people get displaced, they get moved to better infrastructure, and I think that keeping them and them having a chance to be in the community is what's going to be rebuilt. So not just now with this first 100 homes, but we hope to do even more than that from a scalable standpoint as we go forward." The Chief Cares Fund is currently directing all of its efforts towards communities directly affected by damage caused by Helene. According to a press release, Chief Cares will assist not only North Carolina, but all states and communities impacted by Helene from Appalachia to the Gulf, according to their website, where they say, "We are devastated by the unimaginable destruction in the surrounding region, and especially the mountains of western North Carolina. These are our family members, friends, and neighbors. The whole area is in dire need of help, and anyone who knows anything about me knows what North Carolina, and specifically this area in the mountains, means to me personally, as well as creatively." In addition to that, Church has signed over all publishing royalties to Darkest Hour, his latest release in more than 3 years, to the people of North Carolina. Church performed that show live that part of that album live at the 2024 Country Music Association Awards that took place back in November, during which on screen behind him, photos depicting communities impacted were displayed. With that, again, some great news to pass along this morning. The Chief Cares nonprofit, Eric Church's nonprofit group, has purchased land in Avery County. They've got a very aggressive building schedule, looking to have people in homes by June of this year. We'll keep an eye on it over at carolinajournal.com and right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Turning our attention to some state government this morning. Late last week, the North Carolina Office of State Budget Management and the General Assembly's Fiscal Research Division released a consensus revenue forecast projecting a $544 million surplus for the current fiscal year, bringing total general fund revenues to $34.71 billion. That is 1.6% above initial estimates. This increase is attributed to robust economic growth with higher than expected income tax revenues resulting from rising wages, profits, and consumer spending. Governor Josh Stein expressed concerns over the state's financial trajectory, however. He said, quote, "While today's consensus revenue forecast for this year is positive, North Carolina is approaching a fiscal cliff that threatens our ability to invest in rebuilding Western North Carolina, having strong public schools, people's health, infrastructure, and other services that we need to make North Carolina safe and stronger. With a growing economy and population, it shouldn't be this way. I am committed to working with the legislature to develop solutions that allow us to continue to invest in our state's future," end quote there from Governor Stein. The forecast comes as state lawmakers kick off their legislative long session, and the biennium budget process will be beginning here very shortly. The CEO of the John Locke Foundation, Donald Bryson, said, quote, "The hand-wringing about revenue shortfalls at the state level is similar to what we're seeing at the federal level and has everything to do with the difference between using a static model versus a dynamic model for revenue forecasting. State revenue forecasting estimates tax revenue based on existing trends and assumes tax policy will not significantly impact economic behavior. This method offers a simplistic but many times miscalculates revenue changes by ignoring how individuals and businesses respond to tax adjustments. Dynamic forecasting, on the other hand, accounts for behavioral changes by using economic models to predict efforts like shifts in spending, investments, or job creation. While dynamic forecasting models provide a more comprehensive outlook, it relies on assumptions that can add some level of uncertainty to those predictions. Donald Bryson said, "If we think that people don't react to tax changes, then we are really kidding ourselves." Governments often use a mix of both models for a more balanced revenue estimate. The forecast also anticipates challenges ahead due to scheduled tax reductions passed by the Republican-led North Carolina General Assembly. The individual income tax rate is set to decrease from 4.25% where it was last year to 3.49% by 2027. The corporate income tax rate will drop from 2.5% where it was last year to just 2% in 2026. The report reads in part, although inflation has decreased from post-pandemic peaks and job and wage growths have slowed, inflation remains above the Federal Reserve's 2% target with little sign of further cooling in recent months. The revenue forecast assumes the recent momentum of strong economic growth will continue into the beginning of the next biennium, with gradually slowing rates starting in late 2025. The report is produced by the Consensus Forecasting Group, which consists of economists from the Office of State Management and Budget and the General Assembly's Fiscal Research Division. The executive director of the Left of Center North Carolina Budget and Tax Center said in a press release, quote, "This alarming projection comes in the context of huge unmet needs in our state, including a chronically underfunded K-12 public education system, a child care system, and workforce in urgent need of support, as well as Western and Eastern North Carolina residents still struggling to recover from disasters." As the legislative budget discussions do get underway in Raleigh, as the long session is now very much underway, lawmakers face the challenge of balanced planned tax reductions with the need to fund essential services and address unforeseen expenditures such as recovery efforts from Hurricane Helene. A very tricky situation. You can read the entire report by checking out our website this morning. That entire forecast is available over at carolinajournal.com, where it's now 5:45, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Another look at the roads on this Wednesday morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. In anticipation of the winter storm.
your emergency situation station.
Hot.
Good morning again. It's 5:52. You're listening to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Well, the state of North Carolina is under a state of emergency this morning after an emergency briefing took place yesterday with Democrat Governor Josh Stein declaring that ahead of winter weather that is expected to hit the state throughout portions of the day today. Emergency Management Director Will Ray said that the state's emergency response team has been activated along with more than 180 National Guardsmen to assist the emergency response team. Those National Guard assets are positioned in Kinston, Elizabethtown, Edenton, Greensboro, Lewisburg, Rockingham, Surry County, as well as the cities of Raleigh and Charlotte. Stein said that the biggest concerns are power outages and road safety. He said, quote, hazardous travel conditions are expected over the next several days, and we ask all North Carolinians to continue to monitor the weather and stay off of the roads. Unnecessary travel not only puts you at risk, but also public safety personnel, power crews, and DOT workers. Transportation Secretary Joey Hopkins said that the department has more than 1,300 employees and contractors preparing roads statewide, and as of yesterday morning, they had already used over 1 million gallons of brine to pre-treat hundreds of miles of highway across the state. They have nearly 500 trucks with plows and spreaders and 240 motor graders ready to remove the snow and ice once it begins to fall. The transportation department is currently in the process of staging equipment in known trouble spots, and Duke Energy is also preparing for the possibility of power outages. They are moving in crews from out of state to a number of different locations across the state of North Carolina to deal with some of those power outages. It will be mostly snow in the west and the north, more snow and ice mix in the central part of the state, and some very heavy icing in and around the eastern half of the state possible as we head into the afternoon and evening hours tonight. We'll provide the latest updates coming up for you here tomorrow morning. Well, in the North Carolina General Assembly, Republicans there want to prohibit hostile foreign governments like China and Russia from buying agricultural land and property surrounding military installations. The North Carolina Farmland and Military Protection Act was filed this week in the General Assembly. The legislation aims to ban foreign enemies from buying farmland in North Carolina amid reports of growing foreign investments in U.S. agricultural land and systems used to collect. According to Representative Jennifer Balcom, she said, quote, having grown up on a family farm, I know how important it is to preserve North Carolina's farmland. Our state's agricultural land is one of the most important assets, and is common sense that we protect it from our foreign enemies. Here in North Carolina, upwards of 700,000 acres, or 3.5% of agricultural land, is foreignly held, according to a report from the Congressional Research Service. In an effort to protect the state and national security, the bill sponsors said that foreign adversaries such as China and Russia should never be allowed to acquire North Carolina farmland. Representative John Bell from Wayne County said, it is a direct threat to our state and nation to allow China and other adversaries to buy farmland and property surrounding military bases. We must act now to close this dangerous loophole and put a stop to these foreign land grabs. Farmland and military bases are two important factors across the state of North Carolina. As Carolina Journal previously reported, foreign investments in North Carolina lands fall in line with the national trend of U.S. foreign holdings of agricultural land. In 2022, U.S. foreign holdings of ag land grew by more than 8%, according to a report from Reuters. The legislation would prohibit foreign governments that have been designated by the United States Department of State as adversarial from purchasing, acquiring, leasing, or holding any interest in agricultural land or land that's situated within a 75-mile radius of a military installation. As of right now, that would include China, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Russia, and Venezuela. It would also apply to businesses in which one of these foreign adversarial governments have a controlling interest. You can read more details on that story this morning by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com. That's going to do it for a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. Be safe out there today. We are back tomorrow morning 5 to 6 right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.